Hi everybody, and welcome to this oral session in A2. This session is about risk and protective factors, cyberbullying and online safety and loneliness. Also special welcome to everybody who's joined us online. My name is Kalle Gustafsson and I'm Head of Education at Stiftelsen Friends, and I will be your host during these 55 minutes. We have 3 speakers, 2 of them are live here and 1 is pre-recorded and also with us via Zoom for the Q&A. The speakers will have 15 minutes each and we will end this oral session with 10 minutes Q&A. And if you have any questions, please, who are with us online, use the Q&A function and not the chat. And you are present here in the room today, please scan a QR code that's coming up here, this one, and you will get to a link where you can ask your questions. So all the questions are via this digital platform. And in both cases, if you are here in the room or with us online, please address with the name that you want me to ask the questions to of the speakers. So start with the name with the speaker, so I will address the question right. Now, just let me welcome and introduce the first speaker, who will talk about cyberbullying, psychopathic traits, moral disengagement, and school climate, the role of self-reported psychopathic levels, and gender. Kyriakos Charalampous, welcome.
Hello everybody, thank you for attending this session. Today I'm going to present to you a work that me and my colleagues at the University of Cyprus have done. So before I start, I want to thank my colleagues and all the participants in the study. So the purpose of the study was to examine a social ecological diathesis stress model. We used social ecological variables such as the school climate. We used in this model we used the diathesis variables, which refers to biological vulnerability and cognitive vulnerability factors such as psychopathic traits and moral disengagement. And we also use stress factors, which refers to situational stressful events such as cyberbullying. And this is the model we examine. I'm going to present a part of the model, which I'm going to try to explain in the following slides. So cyberbullying first, just a simple definition. Cyberbullying might be considered as a purposeful, repeated, and harmful behavior carried out through computers, cell phones, or other electronic devices. We know for a fact that cyberbullying is considerably different than traditional bullying. For example, it's difficult for the victims to escape their cyber attacks. If you attended yesterday the keynote address by the 2 sisters, you might remember that the one said that their cyber attackers even followed her into bed, meaning that with her cell phone she was an easy target from everywhere. And based on these attributes, researchers are led to believe that cyberbullying might have even more detrimental effects to cyber victims than traditional bullying. Psychopathic traits refer to an array of behaviors such as impulsivity, callousness, unemotionality, manipulation, remorselessness, grandiosity, which relate to social-emotional dysfunction and antisocial behavior. Moral disengagement, on the other hand, refers to cognitive processes that are implemented by individuals to justify morally unacceptable behaviors. Such processes might be giving moral justification to a harmful behavior, dehumanizing or blaming the victim, diffusing responsibility, etc. Research has shown that both psychopathic traits and moral disengagement have unique and combined contributions on cyberbullying perpetration. So, what does research tell us about the joint effect of psychopathic traits and moral disengagement on cyberbullying? Well, some theory supports that moral disengagement might moderate the effect of psychopathic traits on cyberbullying. For example, Ginny, in their study, and her colleagues found that grandiose manipulative adolescents were more likely to exert proactive aggression when they had high levels of moral disengagement. Nonetheless, there is a different explanation for the joint effect of psychopathic traits and moral disengagement. As we said, psychopathic traits refers to socio-emotional dysfunction, and often moral relates to difficulties with taking with morality. So in this instance, one can hypothesize that individuals high in psychopathic traits might actually do not need to use moral disengagement processes to justify their transgressions, because they already have a lack of their callousness, as I said, was one factor. So due to these characteristics, maybe moral disengagement is not a necessary prerequisite for individuals high in psychopathic traits. So this tells us that high psychopathic individuals might not need moral disengagement to engage in cyberbullying, and individuals low in psychopathic traits, that might be the case where moral disengagement might be a factor, and in fact not just a factor, but a mediating variable. So this was the model that we tried to examine in this study. We have moral disengagement mediating the effect of psychopathic traits on cyberbullying, and we wanted to see if different self-reported psychopathic levels would moderate the whole model, and also if we have differences for this model based on gender. That means if girls and boys, males and females, had the same, how this model worked for boys and girls. So participants were 407 high school students, randomly selected from 6 urban and rural schools in Nicosia, Cyprus. The sample was mid-adolescents to late adolescents, and 55% were females. Here are the instruments used. Schools were contacted a priori, and consent was given. For all participants, parental and their own consent was a prerequisite for participating in the study. And participants filled out self-reported questionnaires in school during school hours. We analyzed our data with a maximum likelihood structural equation modeling. We partitioned the sample into 6 groups based on psychopathic levels and gender. So we had boys, high psychopathic boys, medium psychopathic boys, and low psychopathic boys, and girls the same, high, medium, and low psychopathic girls. Now, I'm using the term psychopathic, which is, I don't want to create any misconfusion here. When we say this is the students from the general population, so when we say high or low psychopathic groups, we mean that they are higher from the mean. So we have the average group, which was close to the mean. We have high psychopathic group, which was 1 standard deviation above the mean, and low psychopathic groups, which was 1 standard deviation below the mean. So the results for high psychopathic boys group, we found out that moral disengagement indeed did not predict cyberbullying. For moderate psychopathic boys group, neither moral disengagement nor psychopathic traits predicted cyberbullying. And for the low psychopathic group, moral disengagement was the only predictor of cyberbullying. For girls, results were completely different. Psychopathic traits were a significant predictor for all groups, a significant predictor of cyberbullying for all groups. And moral disengagement was a significant predictor for the high and the medium psychopathic level groups. What we understand from our results is that First, psychopathic levels as well as gender are a defining factor of the joint effect of moral disengagement and psychopathic traits on cyberbullying. The results for boys are in accordance to the hypothesized theoretical model that we examined, in that the mediating power of moral disengagement was attenuated for the high psychopathic groups, given core emotional and moral deficits in high psychopathic adolescents. Moral disengagement was not a factor affecting cyberbullying for these individuals. For girls, however, like I said, results were incongruent to what we expected to find. For female participants, moral disengagement had an effect on cyberbullying only for the high and moderate psychopathic groups. And one explanation for this might be traced to gender socialization differences. The different roles that are expected from boys and girls, from males and female adolescents. Societal norms expect women to be communal and expressive, whereas men are expected to be agentic and instrumental. Thus, for girls, moral disengagement affects cyberbullying only for the high and moderate groups. And since girls seem to apply moral justification for their transgressions only when, much more when social-emotional dysfunction is present. Some limitations for the study. The study was a cross-sectional design. This was a preliminary study. We had follow-ups with longitudinal data, but for this study, all assertions about causality should be cautiously taken. The study only included self-reports, which is a limitation in that we, of course, would like to supplement this with quality data to understand better how the specific variables function and the students' understanding of these variables. And one last limitation is that partitioning the sample led to analyze models with, some models were analyzed with samples less than 100 participants. The models were robust in their statistical indices, and all numbers were in the expected direction. Nonetheless, this didn't allow us to report confidence intervals for the mitigation, confidence intervals for the indirect effects, and thus any assertion for mediation should be cautiously again taken. The contributions of the study findings demonstrated that psychopathic traits, moral disengagement, and school climate. I didn't report anything on school climate due to time restrictions. All have a significant impact on cyberbullying behaviors. And this impact is essentially differentiated based on psychopathic levels and gender. Psychopathic traits play a significant role both as a causal factor of cyberbullying as well as moderating factors affecting other factors influencing cyberbullying. And some further suggestions. Future studies should capitalize on the finding of the present study. Cognitive interventions are warranted. This is one of our conclusions, to educate students on cognitive distortions and to aid them in restructuring their beliefs. Also, additional parameters should be investigated alongside psychopathic traits and moral disengagement in order to allow us to get a better and more holistic understanding of the processes affecting involvement in cyberbullying. Qualitative methods, like I said before, would be very welcome in this line of work to allow us a better understanding of how students interpret and their understanding of the processes involving moral disengagement and the effect of innate biological vulnerability factors such as cyberbullying. And finally, longitudinal studies testing the reciprocal effects between the causal and the dependent study would be also welcome and necessary. as I would say. So thank you for your attention. I would like again to thank my colleagues and participants in the study. This is a published study, so further details you can find in the published paper of this work. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for that, Kyriakos. He will be back later on for the Q&A, so if you have any questions for Kyriakos, use the QR code if you're in the room, or the Q&A function if you're with us online. It's time for the next speaker. It is Sofia Berne. Welcome down on the stage. She will talk about Adolescents' experience of cyber-victimization and body-related concerns. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. It's very nice being here. I'm a bit overwhelmed. This is the first presentation face-to-face since the pandemic started for me, but I will try to manage this. So this is a new situation. But I will present a study about Swedish young people's experience of cyber-victimization and body-related concerns. I have done this study together with Professor Andresen, and we work at the University of Gothenburg. And we are also very grateful to Friends for supporting this research by funding. And the internet, and especially social networking sites, provide a very potent context for the formation of young people's view of their body and appearance. And you can see here different blogs and games and selfies, and they show that beauty ideals are everywhere on social networking sites. And a study found that obese youth are more than twice as likely to be the victim of cyber-aggression compared to normal white peers. I forgot to tell you that I'm telling you a little bit of the background. Probably you noticed that, but before I tell you about our study, I will tell you a little bit about the background concerning that. And we have also found in a study that girls are more often victims of appearance-related cyberbullying. And this was a qualitative study when we interviewed young people, and they also told us that both boys and girls, that they also use this as a potent strategy to hurt girls. They knew that they can hurt girls if they attack them and write very bad things about their appearance and body. So they told us this. We also know from a few studies that appearance is the most commonly reported reasons for being cyberbullied according to victims. So when you give young people different options or reasons like appearance or interest or religion, different types of reasons, they report appearance as the most common reason for being cyberbullied. And we also know from previous research that studies have found that victims reported a poorer body image than non-victims. And also there was gender in effect. Girls who were cyberbullied reported a poorer body image than boys. And we also know that poor body image is related to several consequences, as dieting, taking steroids, undergoing cosmetic surgery. And also we have found, or studies have found, that individuals with poor body image also has an increased risk of eating disorder and depression. So research so far indicate that victims of cyberbullying have both the double burden of both struggling with poor body image and its consequences. So victims of cyberbullying that also have this poor body image has this double burden. Despite the notion that the use of social networking sites is associated with these body concerns, there is no research if victims of cyberbullying have an association with the following body concerns: self-objectification and internalization of body ideals. So this is what we looked at in this study. So nothing was known about the relationship between cyberbullying and objectification, and also if victims were more preoccupied with appearance idols than non-victims. So we went out to schools and we used a questionnaire. We had participants who were 13 to 15 years old, and it was 482 adolescents who participated in the study, and we approached 4 schools. We used different questionnaires. We used a global question about cyberbullying based on Sloan and Smith, and we also asked the participants about reasons for cybervictimization, and we based this question from Mishnah, such as appearance, hobbies, family, gender, etc. We also wanted to look at the body esteem again, so we used a scale that we had used before, which is BISA, and there are 2 subscales that we used: appearance in general and weight. And we also used the OBC youth to measure different aspects of body consciousness, self-surveillance, and body shame. And we also used SATAC 4, and we used 3 subscales where we measured teen idol internalization, muscularity idol internalization, and media pressure. And the first aim in this study was to examine the relationship between cybervictimization and these 3 body-related concerns: body esteem, self-objectification, and internalization of body ideals. We also wanted to look at if this relationship, the second aim was also to examine this relationship not only to cyber-victimization in general, but also to appearance-related cyber-victimization more specifically, since we know that lots of young people say that they most commonly are, or that the cyber-victimization is directed toward this appearance. So we wanted to look at that as well in this study. And the results showed that victims of appearance-related cyberbullying suffered more from body-related concerns, and that victims of appearance-related cyberbullying had poorer view of their general appearance and of their weight. So there we saw the same result that we had seen in other studies, that body esteem is affected by cyber-victimization, so we got the same finding again. But the new finding that we found that hadn't been tested before was that also the victims of appearance-related cyberbullying reported more body shame. So they felt more body shame than non-victims. And we also found that victims of appearance-related cyberbullying suffered from more teen ideal internalization and appearance-related pressure from the media. And we also found that the body-related concern was not related to cyberbullying in general, global cyberbullying, as has been implied in earlier research, because that's what they saw in other studies, but specifically related to cyberbullying directed at the victim's appearance. We didn't find any gender differences in the associations between appearance-related cyberbullying and body-related concern. We were a bit surprised of that, because in earlier studies, gender difference has been shown that girls react more severe. And this is interesting, and of course we want to do more studies and see if we found this again, or if it's something specifically with this study that showed this. But one reason for that could be that a lot of young boys also more and more are preoccupied with appearance and body, and also if you think about the beauty industry, they have a new target group, young boys, and they also try to in different ways engage them in these kinds of behaviors. So this can also be that time has changed, so boys are also affected as much as girls. We don't know that yet. Implications. Parents, school personnel, and anti-bullying teams need to pay attention to the likelihood that victims of appearance-related cyberbullying might suffer from body shames. And feelings of body shames is in itself problematic. It's very problematic to have those kinds of feelings for young people. But it has also been found to have adverse consequences. It's a risk factor, for example, eating disorder. And the findings also suggest that there is a need to include attention to the specific relationship between appearance-related cyberbullying and body-related concerns in future prevention and intervention work. And it's important then to kind of mix two research fields. There's a big research field about body image and body concerns, but also a research field about bullying. And we need to mix those two fields to be able to do this as well. Yes. And this study has also been published so if you want to read more about it, you can see the publication here. And of course, there's a limitation with this study as well. For example, it's a quite small sample. It's only 4 schools that we approached, so we would like to do it in a larger scale, of course, and have more young people to answer this kind of questions, for an example. Yep, thank you for me.
Thank you, and I remind you to send in your questions again. You have the QR code up here. And our next presenter is Jette Kofoed, and this is pre-recorded, and she's not in the room, but we have her co-presenter Helle Rabøl Hansen here, so a big welcome to you. And this presentation is about silent suffering, grief as an irrelevant concept in cyberbullying research.
Thank you. In this paper, we lay out empirical findings of challenging, exclusionary, brutal, and lonely school lives on and offline. We will move from data to theoretical inspiration from Judith Butler's work to arrive at a proposal. Let us consider if and how school grief can be a relevant concept in bullying research. We will be talking about grieving school days. Unfortunately, my co-worker and colleague Jette Kofoed was not able to travel to Stockholm, so we have pre-recorded our paper jointly before I left Copenhagen. Jette will, of course, be present here online. We had some technical challenge when we make the pre-recording, so the first line is gone. So I will give it you now. The first line is first in order to. So let's begin.
In order to establish some kind of starting point, let us make a short remark on the relationality between loneliness and bullying. In Denmark, the field of loneliness and that of bullying are seemingly unrelated. We find interventions against loneliness running parallel with, but not related to, interventions and preventions against bullying. The two phenomena are also often theorized differently. Loneliness is typically understood as a subjective experience of either chosen self-inflicted solitude or imposed loneliness. We have a slightly different approach. We find that loneliness is, in some instances, is not only part of bullying, but that loneliness is bullying. That is, the act of being made lonely in a group where you have a legitimate expectation of belonging. Our interest in how loneliness and bullying entangle was first spurred by a finding back in 2013 in a quantitative expert study. Here we found how loneliness, anxiety, and school unwillingness occurred simultaneously when students self-reported experiences of bullying. So how do we substantiate this?
Next, let us introduce the case we have chosen for this paper. We met Tanya at the age of 19. She explains how she, from her first day of school, has been ignored and kept out of the community of the students of her class. No one talks to her. No one invites her into games or school activities. She is on her own and misses the company of other children. She finds peers in a different context. She is drawn to the far end of the schoolyard where her former kindergarten is. Here she reaches through the fence to her younger peers. In an attempt to unfairly summarize a whole school life of bullying, we could say that her primary years of school is experienced through silent bullying. Later, during 5th and 6th grade, the silence is exchanged with more verbal, active and direct despiteful exclusion. However, the exclusion does not stop but continues into 8th and 9th grade, now topped up with social media as an effective exclusionary tool. Outside school, Tanya finds no friends either. Next to her school life is a family life, which can best be summed up as being characterized by intense and sometimes violent conflicts. Tanya is triple challenged by social discomfort and uncertainty within her 3 core life bases: home, school, leisure, time. Tanya's response to all this is silence. She simply chooses not to speak for 2 years, not a word. At the age of 19, she looks back and testifies, "I have never had a friend."
We have been quietly as well as eagerly preoccupied with this particular case for years. It is chosen for this conference with discernment. We wanted to raise a detailed yet profound discussion of how vulnerability, loneliness and grief entangle with bullying and bullying research. And let us hesitate for a moment to take in the depth of Tanya's testimony. "I have never had a friend." One of Tanya's peers substantiates much the same when he says, "I needed them, but they did not need me. They had friends, I had not." We will thus, within our 15 minutes, time and space travel between the case of Tanya, Judith Butler's concept of grief, concepts of bullying, and manners in which to kind of stretch the definitional work of bullying further. We were both part of the Danish research group Experts. From 2007 to 2013, we did empirical work where we found a tendency in school-based ethnographies, which is that most cases of bullying reported by and accounted for by students seem to be characterized by being periodic or seasonal. Not that bullying followed any annual temporality, of course, but rather that there were periods of bullying and then there were not. However, the overall level of bullying within the class seemed to be rather constant. We talked of this as shifting positions. We did occasionally find more cases of more permanent bullying, of course. A few years after the closing of Experts, we were invited to a so-called production school at the outskirts of Copenhagen. Here the pattern we knew from Experts seemed to be kind of stretched. Most of the students who had experiences of bullying could account for continuous and long-term bullying. Tanya is one of the 15 young people whom we interviewed at this particular school back in 2017. This particular location was chosen because teachers and school managers pointed out something quite striking. Many, and what seemed like a majority of the school population, brought with them negative school narratives holding hardcore both social and curricular exclusions. We have no quantitative data to substantiate this hunch, but we have interviews. As mentioned, we talked to such 15 students and 2 of their teachers. And on a quick note, production schools is an educational offer to young people in Denmark who have finalized primary school and who cannot or will not enroll in upper secondary education.
We need to distinguish between shifting position and hardcore bullying. We understand bullying as extreme social exclusion, where bullying is situated locally in a process of distribution of position within hierarchies of exclusion. In order to be able to grasp a particular brutal and violent shape of bullying, Tanya is exposed to continuous and sustainable bullying, making use of a variety of bullying patterns: silence, violence, insults, and nicknaming in the schoolyard, as well as on social media. We think of such experiences as hardcore bullying, which is different from shifting position in more seasonal bullying. In order to grasp why the distinction is necessary, let us return shortly to Tanya. Tanya's triple challenge life is topped up. It so happens that Tanya is being sexually abused by one of her brothers. This is, of course, severe abuse in and of itself. Her private life is complicated by her brother now facing a sentence. Her parents' divorce tears the family apart. The case of abuse is spectacular in itself and is on top covered by the local media. But the abuse, the sentence, and the break-up of her family does not stay protected, but travels into school as a continuation of insults. The information in local media spurs new comments, now on social media. Which one of your brothers are you having sex with?
Such hardcore bullying over a substantial period of time can turn into, as in the case of Tanya, experiences of loss by witnessing the viable school life of her peers through a window into a shared life to which she herself has no access and no legitimate entry point. Hence, let us now unpack what such loss is made up of. In everyday understandings, grief is often perceived to relate to the loss of a person, that is, by death or illness. In order to unpack the kind of loss Tanya talks about, we need to turn to Judith Butler. Her work on grief and loss lifts grief into a political framework and into relations as being more than the individual I who has suffered a loss. So in order to grasp how extreme exclusionary practices can be sensed as silent suffering, the act of not speaking for 2 years, we propose to think of such practices as effective drivers in processes of hardcore bullying. With this suggestion, we aim to lift the concept of grief out of bereavement research. We do so in order to see if new insights of bullying might surface by bringing the concept of grief in touch with bullying. The particular grief we find in Tanya's account is not only sadness, but lost relations. What in her case is lost and what is suffered has never been had. Is there something to be gained from attending to grief in school life? Can this be a point of departure for understanding this particular corner of school bullying? Butler says, and I quote, "When we lose certain people or when we're dispossessed from a place or a community, we may simply feel that we're undergoing something temporary, that mourning will be over and some restoration of prior order will be achieved. It is not as if an I exists independently over here and then simply loses a you over there, especially if the attachment to you is part of who composes who I am. If I lose you under these conditions, then I not only mourn the loss, but I become inscrutable to myself. Who am I without you?" End of quote. We read this quote with an attentiveness to how the you mentioned might not merely refer to a specific you. If we open it up to suggest that such you might also be read as the community, the collective you in which you are placed.
The lost you could then well be the potential friendship which might have emerged had things turned out differently. If we allow the lost you to be a collective you, then Butler's thinking allows us to grasp how absence of taken for granted participation in the community of the school class can be valid as suffering, loss, and experience of grief. Tanya's experience of disinterestedness is conditioned by the community. Such disinterestedness is not exterior but becomes part of the I and re-raises Butler's question, who am I without you? Tanya lives outside of the you of the community. Grief is socialized, so to speak. It is possible to lose what you do not have and to sense the loss.
So Tanya's loss can best be described as what we will call an immaterial loss. A loss of what or how it could have been. Tanya is living the silent suffering in experiencing the loss of a school life that was promised but never happened. We play with the legal phrase ideal, immaterial, in order to be able to grasp how what is lost is not a person. What is lost here is not something that you have had. You lose something that you have never had. You lose what could have been. And Tanya knew what kind of school life was present because she saw it. The fact that she witnessed the school life does not make up for the loss itself, but the witnessing of an inaccessible school life becomes the anchor of what could have been. Hence, the terminology of an immaterial loss. Need you have it to lose it?
Tanya is present in the shape of a zombie, witnessing those alive while social dead herself. Such loss of life is social death. We have talked about hardcore bullying, social death, unhappiness, vulnerability, silent suffering, loss of which never was, which is nonetheless sensed. This chain of affective events and experience begs a conceptualization that aims to hold it all. This is what we suggest to address us in terms of school grief, complicated grieving of school days. No.
Okay, thank you. And welcome back to stage, all the three speakers. And if you have any questions, use the QR code or the Q&A function on online. There is some questions who has come in, and you can still send in questions if you want to. The first question is for you, Kyriakos. Do you see an ethical problem in classifying young people as psychopathic? Do they know themselves that they are classified as potential psychopathic? Is there a possibility that psychopathic actions such as bullying can be explained by other factors than personality traits? A long question.
Yes. Like I explained, the terminology might not be exactly appropriate, so I clarified this in the presentation. When we say high, low, or medium psychopathic groups, we don't mean that the individuals are indeed a clinical population. These are community pupils, regular school students, who just answer the questionnaire regarding psychopathic traits, and their scores happen to fall, for the high psychopathic groups, it happens to fall one standard deviation above the mean. So we are not talking about serious cases, for God's sake, no. It's just that we see that small increase, and I have to clarify that psychopathic traits indeed are personality traits, and they are considered stable throughout life. For the most part, we have seen changes in adolescence, but for the most part, they are considered stable. So it's a factor, it's there, and I think the question was about the morality of the... So we know that maybe it's not easy to change the biological vulnerability characteristics as psychopathic traits, but we want to see how small differences in these traits, how they affect and how they interact with other variables. So we understand that there is a limitation as to what the school or interventions can do with psychopathic traits per se, but of course we want to see how contextual variables, and like I said, we also use school climate variables, we also, and of course the moral disengagement, to see how the interaction works and to understand better how to tackle this issue. So I don't know, I don't see anything with morality in examining this. For the label, I'm saying the label is misleading because we are not talking about psychopathic individuals, but individuals reporting higher psychopathic levels or lower than their peers.
Thank you for your answer. We have another question for you as well. Do you think or do you expect to get different results with your longitudinal analysis, and if so, why?
Yes, one of the limitations of the study was that it was a cross-sectional one. We have data, we haven't still analyzed it. Okay, given that psychopathic traits are generally considered to be stable, we think that this will possibly not change their role as a determinant of cyberbullying. On the other hand, it will be interesting to see how long time the interaction with moral disengagement, if indeed moral disengagement is, I think longitudinal study will help us clarify the mediating role of moral disengagement, which was not so clear in this particular study. Our results indicated that there was a moderating role from psychopathic traits, especially for boys, that was clear. High psychopathic group, no effect from moral disengagement. Low psychopathic group, the only significant effect was from moral disengagement. So we know that psychopathic levels moderate the joint effect of psychopathic traits and moral disengagement. For girls, that was a totally different story. But we know, again, that we have psychopathic levels moderating the joint effect. But as for the role of moral disengagement, I think longitudinal study will help us more on that to gain a better insight on how that mechanism works.
A question for you, Sofia. What were the prevalence rates of appearance-related cyberbullying, victimization, and general cyberbullying victimization? So what were the prevalence rates of appearance-related cyberbullying victimization and general cyberbullying victimization?
That's a very important question, and I should have had those prevalence rates in my hand or in my head, but unfortunately I don't. They are in the article, and I don't want to guess. I have a few, but I don't want to guess. So I'm sorry. I have to. I can't answer that question now, but it's in the article.
It's in the article.
Yeah. Those rates are in the article, but it's better that I don't. I don't guess, but I think it's better to pass. So read in the article. But a very good question, and I, of course, should have known it and explained it for you in the presentation. Sorry for that.
No problem. And we also have a question for Kofoed and Hansen. Or do we have her? Yes, perfect. We also have her via Zoom. Welcome to you as well. Now everybody sees you here in the room. The question for you is, what do you think is the most important contribution of the concept of grief when thinking about bullying, the phenomenon of bullying? What does it add? What do it makes us see?
Svar, Jette.
Hello, everybody. I think it allows us to be curious about the relationality of how come a severe incident of hardcore bullying can be experienced in silent suffering. And with the concept of grief, it allows us to unpack how that intriguing relationality between hardcore bullying and the severity of that and the silence can unfold. And it also allows us to address the affectivity of bullying in a different manner than just adding emotions to as individual traits, but rather as the unfolding of affectivity in a community where the loss is not physical but immaterial. So it allows us to understand what is so easily overlooked, because we think of loss as a lost relation. And what we're talking about here is the loss of something that never happened. And I think we need to grasp that corner of bullying and bullying research as well. Helle, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you answered perfectly.
Thank you. Sofia, a question for you. Now when you have after your presentation and after this research, what's your next step from here?
I think it's really important to keep on looking at these different aspects of the relation between cyberbullying and also body-related concerns. So as I said when I took up the implication, I think it would really be fruitful if we could look at the body image field, where there are a lot of research and development against poor body image, and also kind of maybe, and I know that our researchers are looking at it, include something that concerns the part or be inspired of that research into this field. But I think it's a big, the next step, of course, is to think more about prevention and intervention regarding these things. But I'm not like specifically can I say what to do about that. But it's important. Yeah.
Thank you. And we've got a question here who's not addressed to anyone. So I think maybe all of three of you could answer this. And this is about, how do you think one can work preventively against bullying in kindergarten or in preschool? Jette and Helle, what do you think about that question?
Yeah, I think nobody will be surprised if I say that working with the community, the work with the condition that is surrounding the condition as a context for bullying. And here I think the very necessary shift is not to shame out the individuals. But if there is some beginning of extreme exclusion, there's something wrong in the concrete environment. There's something that maybe there's loneliness, maybe there's not a very good near relation to the adults, the professional adults that's working there, and so on. Pay attention to such thing, and don't wait to you experience there is a bullying pattern already. So, yeah, that's my best advice.
Jette, do you want to say anything further about that?
I think one of the findings we have from the experts survey back from 2013 was the finding what we call the Bermuda Triangle, which is that we see when students self-report bullying, experiences with bullying, we also find indications of loneliness, anxiety, and school unwillingness. And we often say that there's a correlation, and we don't know which one is the beginning factor, but we do find that those things are present while bullying is present as well. So that might be other ways or entry points into figuring out what's going on in the community. So anxiety, loneliness, and school unwillingness or kindergarten unwillingness might be entry points for adults who are responsible for the context.
Thank you. I know we are a little bit over time, but of course I said that you have the chance to answer this as well. I know that your target groups or your research aimed adolescents and a little bit more older people than kindergarten. But if we maybe have a kindergarten teacher, preschool teacher in here, anything you can say to them about how we can preventively work with cyberbullying already in preschool? Do you have any tips or ideas or thoughts? Kyriakos, what do you say?
What I would say is that kindergarten school is an age where we know that children develop cognitively and socially. It's a critical period for their development. I believe that's important in that period to cultivate empathy. Empathy should be a key factor for kindergarten students to be able to understand the feelings of our student, to respect, to join their position. That would be a very important skill to try to cultivate, and I think the age is appropriate. It's the age where they start to see the world, to understand, to socially engage with other students. So that's a skill, that's a social skill that needs to be cultivated at that specific age group, and that would have protective results both for their for other students, but also for the individual themselves as they grow up to join primary, elementary school, and after in their adolescent and adult life.
Thank you. Sofia, do you have anything to
add? Yeah, I agree with all the other what they have said, but I would also like to add a specific type of bullying, exclusion, that we need to very early, the grown-ups need to not normalize exclusion. I mean, I think when I meet a lot of young people and do interview with them, they often tell that the adult world, sometimes they say that, it's okay, everybody doesn't need to hang out with everybody. But as we could hear before, I mean, the presentation that Helle and Jette did, it's really severe exclusion when it happens for a long time. And I guess that we need to try to work against early to normalize that kind of behavior that you also explained in this presentation. So that's a really important thing, I think, to not normalize that and not from the grown-up world say that's okay. So the kids start thinking, okay, this is the way I have to have it. Yeah. So, but a lot of other things as well, of course. But I think that's important.
Thank you for that. Thanks to all who've been here today. And of course, thank you to all your four for your presentations. Give them a big applause, I think.